I remember the day we signed the papers like it was yesterday. It was supposed to be the last chapter of a painful saga, a messy divorce that left both of us emotionally scarred. For years, I had tried to make it work. I put so much energy into our relationship, convinced that love alone could fix everything. But the cracks were too deep, and the silence between us had grown louder than any words we could say. I had always been the one who tried to understand him, to see things from his perspective. He was distant, withdrawn, but I thought that maybe, just maybe, he needed more time. But the time never came. It was a slow, suffocating process of pulling away, piece by piece, until I finally realized there was nothing left to salvage. We were two strangers who had just been pretending to be something we weren't. In the beginning, it wasn't always like this. We had good times, moments when I could see the man I fell in love with. He would smile, hold my hand, whisper sweet things in my ear. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel alone, even when he was right next to me. He'd withdraw after every argument, disappear into himself, and I would be left to pick up the pieces. I kept hoping he'd come back to me, that he'd see how much I loved him, that things could go back to the way they were. But they never did. The love we once shared had faded, leaving nothing but the memory of what could have been. The decision to file for divorce wasn't easy. It wasn't about him being a bad person or even us being bad for each other. It was simply a realization that we no longer fit. We were two pieces of a puzzle that no longer matched, and no amount of effort from either of us would change that. When I finally told him I wanted to end things, his face didn't show much emotion. It was like he had already prepared himself for it, like he had been expecting it for longer than I had. He didn't fight me. He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't even cry. We went to the lawyer's office, sat there side by side in that sterile room, and signed the papers. It was over. Just like that. No grand gestures, no apologies. It was a quiet ending to a loud, painful chapter of our lives. I remember staring at the papers for a long time before signing, feeling an ache in my chest. This was it. This was what I had wanted for so long, but now that it was happening, I wasn't sure I was ready for it. The relief didn't come immediately. Instead, there was a numbness, a sense of emptiness that washed over me. And then, just like that, he told me he was leaving. He didn't make a big deal out of it. No goodbye, no final words. He just packed his things and went. The man I had spent years with, the man I thought I knew, was suddenly a stranger, walking out of my life without looking back. It wasn't what I expected. I thought he would chase me, beg me to reconsider, to give us one more chance. But he didn't. He left. And I was left there, alone with the reality that I had misjudged everything. My heart wanted him to fight for me, but he didn't. And that hurt more than anything. At first, I couldn't understand why he left so easily. I thought I would be devastated, but it wasn't devastation that hit me first, it was confusion. I had expected an outpouring of emotions, maybe even a sense of relief, but instead, I was left with this hollow ache inside of me, a sense of abandonment that I couldn't shake. I didn't know how to feel. The man I had spent years with, the man I had once shared everything with, was gone, and it felt like I was holding on to the remnants of a life that no longer existed. I kept replaying our last moments together in my head, trying to piece together the exact moment everything had fallen apart. What had gone wrong? Where did it all slip through our fingers? But the answers didn't come. There was just this endless loop of questions and regrets, and I couldn't escape it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to let him go completely, but at the same time, I couldn't keep holding on to something that had already slipped away. I spent the first few days in a haze, not knowing what to do with myself. It was as if my whole world had been turned upside down, and I was left to navigate through the wreckage. I had been so consumed by the relationship, so focused on trying to fix what was broken, that I forgot who I was outside of it. Now, I was forced to remember. Forced to rediscover who I was without him by my side. Friends and family told me I was better off, that time would heal the wounds, and that eventually, I would look back and see how much stronger I had become. They were all well-meaning, but the words felt hollow. How could I be better off when I still loved him? How could I feel strong when I was drowning in the uncertainty of what had just happened? There were days when I couldn't get out of bed, when I would just lie there and stare at the ceiling, thinking about how my life had been turned upside down in an instant. But then, as the days turned into weeks, something changed. I started to focus on myself. I made small changes, cleaned out the closet, rearranged the furniture, and started cooking meals just for me. I even took a trip by myself, something I would never have done when we were together. It was an awkward feeling at first, being by myself in unfamiliar places, but slowly, I began to realize that I could do things on my own. I didn't need him to validate me. I didn't need anyone to tell me who I was. I was beginning to rediscover my own identity, one that didn't revolve around our relationship. Still, the silence was hard to live with. It was like a weight on my chest. Everywhere I went, everything I did, felt like a reminder of what had been. I missed the way he would make me laugh, the way we'd sit on the couch and watch TV together. But I had to remind myself that those moments were gone, and I couldn't keep chasing after something that wasn't coming back. I tried to fill the void with new things, new hobbies, new people, new experiences, but no matter what I did, it never seemed to completely fill the emptiness. There was always a part of me that missed him, that wondered what could have been. But I learned to live with that sadness, to accept that life had moved on, and so would I. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, and I had slowly started to find my footing. The pain wasn't as sharp, but it was always lingering, just beneath the surface. I had convinced myself that I was okay, that I had moved on, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. And then came the call. It was a Friday evening, and I was sitting on the couch, sipping wine and scrolling through my phone when my phone rang. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but there was something about it that made my heart race. I answered the call, unsure of what to expect. Hello? It was him. His voice, the one I hadn't heard in months, filled my ears. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected this. Why was he calling now, after all this time? Hi, he said, his voice distant, almost unsure. I just wanted to see how you were doing. I didn't know how to respond. The past 6 months had been filled with questions and emotions that I had tried so hard to push away. I had spent so much time healing, trying to understand what went wrong, and now he was back. It was like a ghost from the past had suddenly resurfaced, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. I'm fine, I said, my voice shaky. Why are you calling now? There was a pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, like he was searching for the right words to say. I don't know, he finally admitted. I've been thinking about you. A lot. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He had left without a second thought, without a word of explanation, and now, months later, he was calling me like nothing had happened. Like he could just waltz back into my life after everything he had put me through. I don't know what you expect from me, I said, my voice shaking with a mix of frustration and hurt. You left. You didn't even fight for us. You moved on, and I had to do the same. I can't just forget everything. I could hear the regret in his voice as he responded. I'm sorry for how everything ended. I didn't know what I was doing. I thought I was making the right choice, but now I realize I was wrong. I felt a knot form in my stomach. The words were familiar, too familiar. I had heard apologies like this before. They didn't make things better. They didn't erase the hurt. But despite my anger, there was a part of me that still longed for the man he once was, for the person I thought I knew. I tried to shake off the thought, to remind myself that this was the man who had abandoned me when I needed him the most. "I've changed," he said, his voice soft. "I'm not the same person I was when I left. And I know I hurt you. But I can't help how I feel. I just wanted to see if there was still a chance for us." A chance for us? Was he serious? After everything, after months of healing, he thought he could just waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. "No," I said, my voice firm, even though my heart was torn. "There is no chance for us anymore. It's too late." I ended the call before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking, and my chest felt tight. The words I had said felt final, but inside, I was still battling with the emotions that his call had stirred up. I had spent so long telling myself that I didn't need him, that I was better off without him, but in that moment, I felt lost. Was it possible to truly move on from someone you thought you would spend the rest of your life with? I didn't know. But I did know that I couldn't keep holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. I took a deep breath and put my phone down, trying to push the feelings aside. I wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: I had to move forward, with or without him. It had been 2 weeks since that call, and I hadn't heard from him again. At first, I thought I would feel relief, but instead, I was left with an unsettling emptiness, like I was waiting for something that would never come. I had convinced myself that the call was a moment of weakness for him, a fleeting thought that he would eventually forget. But that didn't stop my mind from replaying the conversation over and over. What did it mean? Why did he reach out after all this time? I tried to focus on my life, on the things I had built in the absence of his presence. I was back at work, meeting new people, and even started a hobby I'd always wanted to try. Still, the questions lingered in the background of my mind. I had started to move on, but a part of me still couldn't let go of the idea of us, of what could have been. One afternoon, while I was sitting in a cafe, scrolling through my phone, I saw a notification that nearly made my heart stop. It was an email from him. I stared at the subject line for a long time before opening it. My fingers hovered over the screen as a mix of curiosity and dread washed over me. After everything, did he really have the nerve to send me a message like this? I took a deep breath and opened it. "Hi," the email started, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation. I know I can't undo the past, but I've realized something. I'm not the person I was when I left. I'm not the person I was when I made all those mistakes. I know this is asking a lot, but I was wondering if we could talk." My stomach sank as I read the words. The email was filled with more apologies, more regrets. It was like he was trying to rewrite history, trying to make me believe that everything could be different. But I wasn't the same person either. I had spent months trying to rebuild myself, trying to find my sense of self again. I didn't need to hear these words again. They weren't going to change what happened. They weren't going to erase the years of pain, the loneliness, the abandonment. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to hear him out, to get the closure I hadn't gotten when he left. But another part of me knew that opening that door again would only take me backwards. I had spent so long fighting for my independence, for my peace of mind, and I wasn't ready to throw that away just because he felt guilty. I deleted the email without replying. I knew it was the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. The emotions I had tried so hard to bury started to resurface: resentment, sadness, regret. But they were different now, not as raw as before. They were fading. Slowly, but surely, I was learning to let go of the past, even if it meant letting go of him, too. The next few days passed, and I felt a shift inside me. The pain of the past didn't sting as much. I was beginning to understand that I didn't need him to validate my worth. I didn't need him to make up for the hurt he caused. I was enough, just as I was. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful again. I could see a new beginning ahead of me, one that didn't involve him. I could build a life for myself, without needing anyone to complete me. And that realization, more than anything, was what gave me the strength to move on. A month had passed since I deleted his email, and with each passing day, I felt more and more at peace. It wasn't easy, but I had accepted that our chapter was over, and I had begun to embrace the idea of moving forward. I started focusing on the future rather than dwelling on the past, and in doing so, I discovered a new sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I was rediscovering myself, who I was before he came into my life, and who I could be on my own. Then, one evening, as I was leaving work, I ran into him. I didn't expect it. I wasn't prepared for it. But there he was, standing by his car, looking just as I remembered him, except he seemed different. There was a look in his eyes that I couldn't quite place, a vulnerability that felt strange coming from the man I once knew. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. My first instinct was to turn and walk away, to ignore him just like I had been doing for the last few weeks. But instead, I took a deep breath and stepped toward him, bracing myself for whatever was about to unfold. "Hey," he said, his voice uncertain. "I didn't expect to see you here." I nodded, my heart beating fast. I didn't want to be rude, but I also didn't want to make this more difficult than it already was. "It's good to see you," I said, even though I wasn't sure if it was. The truth was, I wasn't sure how I felt about seeing him again. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened," he said, his voice quieter now. "I know I've hurt you, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I've realized something in these past few months. I've made so many mistakes, and I didn't even see it until I was away from you. I wasn't the man you deserved." His words stung, but not in the way they once did. They didn't break me anymore. It was almost as if his apologies were too late, too little. The past was gone, and no amount of regret could undo what had already been done. I realized then that I didn't need his approval to move on. I had already forgiven him in my own way, but it was for me, not for him. "I don't need you to say all of this," I told him, my voice steady. "I've spent too much time thinking about what we had, trying to figure out why it fell apart. But the truth is, I've come to terms with it. I'm not the person I was when we were together, and neither are you. And that's okay." He looked at me, eyes searching, as if he were hoping I'd change my mind. But I didn't. I knew that the person I had become was stronger, more independent than I ever thought I could be. And that was worth more than anything he could offer now. "I'm glad you're okay," he said, after a long pause. "I just wanted to know that. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." I smiled, a small but genuine smile, and nodded. "Thank you. But I'm okay. I've been okay for a while now." We stood there for a few more moments, but there was nothing left to say. I didn't need to hear anything else. I didn't need him to come back into my life. The closure I had been searching for had come not from his words, but from within me. As I turned to walk away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't angry. I wasn't holding on to the past. I was free. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly start over. And this time, I was going to do it for me.